The British Empire at its peak in the early 1920s covered nearly a quarter of the Earth's land and ruled over 458 million people, about 1/5 of the world's population. The phrase, "the sun never sets on the British Empire," was a literal truth, with British influence touching every continent. This global reach was no accident. It was built over centuries through ambition, exploration, trade, and conflict. The empire was a complex web of colonies, dominions, and protectorates, each tied to the crown in different ways. But the real power behind this dominance was the sea. The British Empire was fundamentally a maritime empire, its strength projected by the Royal Navy. Ships, not armies, connected distant territories, making Britain a global power. Control of the oceans allowed a small island nation to manage a vast, interconnected system of commerce and governance. The empire's arteries were the sea lanes, carrying goods, people, and ideas across the globe. The story of the British Empire is inseparable from the story of its ships and the oceans they crossed. Through maritime mastery, Britain left a permanent mark on the world, shaping nations, economies, and cultures. Its legacy, for better or worse, endures long after the empire itself faded into history. The British Empire's rise was gradual, driven by commerce, competition, and above all, naval power. Early explorers and privateers challenged Spanish and Portuguese dominance, laying the groundwork for future expansion. The establishment of colonies like Jamestown marked the start of Britain's imperial ambition. Fierce competition with France, Spain, and the Netherlands led to global conflicts, with the Royal Navy as Britain's ultimate weapon. Victories like the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 secured British control of the seas for over a century. This, Pax Britannica, allowed the empire to expand and thrive, protected by the Navy's reach. The Royal Navy defended trade routes, suppressed piracy and the slave trade, and enforced British policy worldwide. Sea power enabled the free movement of goods and people, enriching Britain and binding the empire together. The Navy was more than a military force. It was the backbone of a global economic system. Without its ships, the British Empire would have been a scattered collection of outposts, not a unified global power. India, the jewel in the crown, was the empire's most populous and profitable possession. British rule began with the East India Company's trading posts, but soon expanded through military and political dominance. After the 1857 rebellion, the British Raj was established, bringing direct rule and a new administrative elite. For British officials, India offered privilege and power, but for most Indians it meant economic exploitation and social upheaval. Railways, telegraphs, and canals were built to serve imperial interests, not local needs. Indian industries suffered under British imports, and farmers were pushed to grow cash crops for export. British legal and educational systems created a new elite but marginalized traditional knowledge and governance. Divide and rule policies deepened religious and ethnic divisions, sowing seeds of future conflict. British India was a story of modernization and exploitation, unity and division. Its legacy still felt today. British Australia began as a penal colony, a solution to overcrowded prisons after the loss of the American colonies. The first fleet arrived in 1788, establishing a harsh settlement at the edge of the known world. Convicts endured brutal conditions, but over time, free settlers arrived, drawn by land and the booming wool industry. Gold discoveries in the 1850s sparked a rush, transforming Australia into a dynamic, multicultural society. This rapid growth came at a devastating cost to Aboriginal peoples who were dispossessed and decimated by disease and violence. British settlers claimed the land as terra nullius, ignoring indigenous rights and cultures. By 1901, the colonies federated as the Commonwealth of Australia, a self-governing dominion within the empire. Australia's journey from penal colony to nation reflects both opportunity and the tragic impact of empire on indigenous peoples. Its identity today is shaped by this complex legacy. Britain's presence in Canada began with the search for the Northwest Passage and the fur trade, but rivalry with France defined its colonial era. The British victory in the Seven Years' War secured control over Quebec and set the stage for a bicultural nation. The Quebec Act of 1774 allowed French Canadians to keep their religion and civil law, ensuring loyalty during the American Revolution. Loyalists fleeing the United States boosted the English-speaking population and shaped a distinct Canadian identity. Throughout the 19th century, British North America expanded westward, driven by trade and settlement. Confederation in 1867 united the provinces into the Dominion of Canada, a self-governing entity within the empire. Canada became a model for other settler colonies, balancing British heritage with local autonomy. Its evolution reflects the complexities of empire, identity, and coexistence. For centuries, European involvement in Africa was limited to coastal trading posts and the slave trade. The scramble for Africa in the late 19th century saw Britain and other powers carve up the continent with little regard for local realities. Motivated by economic gain, strategic interests, and national pride, Britain seized key territories, often justifying conquest as a civilizing mission. Colonization was brutal, with artificial borders splitting kingdoms and forcing rival groups together. British rule imposed new laws, economies, and education systems, often exploiting local labor for imperial profit. Infrastructure like railways served extraction, not development. The legacy of colonial boundaries and disruption still fuels conflict and instability in Africa today. Empire in Africa was a story of dispossession, exploitation, and enduring consequences. The British Caribbean was built on sugar, and on the suffering of enslaved Africans. Sugar plantations created immense wealth for Britain, but life for the enslaved was brutal and dehumanizing. Despite oppression, enslaved people preserved their heritage and resisted through culture, rebellion, and escape. The abolition movement led to the end of the slave trade in 1807 and slavery itself in 1833, but freedom brought little equality. Plantation owners were compensated, the formerly enslaved received nothing. Indentured laborers from India replaced slave labor, adding new layers to Caribbean society. The region remained economically dependent on Britain, with old power structures largely intact. The legacy of slavery and colonialism shapes the Caribbean's challenges and vibrant cultures today. It is a story of resilience amid profound injustice. The British Empire's most enduring legacy is the spread of the English language, now a global lingua franca. English became the language of administration, law, and education across the empire, creating new elites and connecting distant lands. The common law system, based on precedent, shaped legal frameworks in countries from the US to India. British parliamentary democracy influenced governments worldwide, promoting traditions like the rule of law and loyal opposition. The empire exported sports, architecture, and customs, while also importing foods, words, and ideas from its colonies. This cultural exchange transformed both Britain and its colonies, but often came at the expense of local traditions. Colonial education prioritized British history and literature, sidelining indigenous cultures and fostering a sense of inferiority. The result is a world more connected by language and institutions, but also marked by cultural wounds and identity struggles. Cricket in India, tea in Britain, and legal systems across continents all trace back to imperial influence. The legacy is complex shared frameworks and deep divisions, global connections and lingering colonial mentalities. The British Empire's cultural impact is everywhere, visible, contested, and still evolving. Its imprint shapes how nations see themselves and each other. Understanding this legacy is key to understanding our interconnected world. The British Empire's decline was swift, hastened by 2 world wars and the rise of independence movements. Decolonization swept the globe after 1947, ending formal empire but leaving a lasting legacy. The Commonwealth of Nations emerged, a voluntary association of former colonies, now equal partners. Shared language, law, and institutions bind these nations, fostering cooperation on global issues. The empire's legacy is visible in world maps, financial systems, and multicultural societies shaped by migration. Economic inequalities and political tensions often trace back to imperial relationships and borders. Understanding the British Empire helps explain why English is spoken worldwide, why cricket thrives in Pakistan, and why legal systems resemble each other across continents. The story of the empire is one of achievement and injustice, connection and conflict. A small island nation reshaped the globe, creating the complex, vibrant world we inhabit today. To understand our present, we must reckon with the empire's enduring influence.